Hello, anatomy students. Welcome to our first body systems module. We're starting off with the integumentary system, or the study of the skin. These are our objectives. After reading the material and attending lecture or listening to these videos and taking notes, students will correctly contrast the structural characteristics and locations of the epidermis, dermis, and hypodermis, describe the characteristics of each layer of the epidermis, and then you have a couple of other objectives as well. This portion of the lecture will cover only numbers 1 and 2. The note sheet that hopefully you've printed out from the module is not fill in the blank, and it's mostly about you constructing your own notes and your own definitions. The diagrams that I've used on the note sheet, however, do correspond to the ones that I've used in this PowerPoint, so you can always pause them, pause the PowerPoint, and then you can label the diagrams, and then you can restart it again. Okay, are you ready? Let's go. So this diagram is showing you kind of the flow, the connections between different parts of the skin. The most superficial layer of the skin is called the epidermis. So that's the part of the skin that we see. Below that is the dermis. And then below that is the subcutaneous layer. And technically, this isn't a part of the skin, but we do talk about it because it does help to provide some characteristics that our skin has. We're going to focus first on the epidermis, which is the light pink layer. And the other thing that I want you to notice about these slides is that up in the upper right-hand corner of your screen, I show you this exact diagram, and I've blocked out the stuff that we're not focusing on that particular slide, and I've highlighted the concepts that we are talking about on those slides, so you can always follow along with this diagram. So when we talk about the epidermis, we're going to talk first about specialized cells. So we're going to start at the bottom, and we're going to talk about the layers and the importance of keratinized stratified squamous epithelium. So there are 3 layers that we're going to talk about as far as the structure of the skin is concerned. This is the cutaneous membrane. The cutaneous membrane is the skin. The most superficial portion is the epidermis, and it is avascular, meaning that it doesn't have any blood vessels, as you can see here in the picture. No blood vessels there. The dermis is largely connective tissue. It's vascular, and it's much thicker than the epidermis itself. And then the hypodermis, which is found here at the bottom, is going to help to protect the body. It's not necessarily a part of the skin, but it is deep to the skin. All right, we're going to kick it off by talking about specialized cells. Keratinocytes are the cells that make up the layers of the epidermis. Again, that's the most superficial layer of the skin. They have tiny granules of protein called keratin. And they also have lamellar granules, which are going to help regulate water entry and loss. They're made out of lipids. The keratinocytes, are going to protect also against infection. Melanocytes are going to have these tiny granules of skin pigment called melanin. Melanin is going to darken the skin. So the more melanin a person has in their skin, the darker the tone is. Melanin works to absorb ultraviolet light, and they are typically going to cluster around and over the nucleus in order to protect the DNA within from exposure to ultraviolet radiation, which can damage the DNA and cause mutations. So the melanocytes are going to cluster around that in order to help protect the nuclei. We also have intraepidermal macrophages. These were previously called Langerhans cells, and these are going to phagocytize invaders or antigens and then present them to cells of the immune system in order to help mount an immune response in order to protect the rest of our body from microbial invasion. And the other type of cell to know are called the tactile epithelial cells. These cells are going to have their location in the lower levels of the epidermis, and they are associated with a sensory neuron. The older name for these were called Merkel cells, and they sense light touch. Sorry. All right, moving up our diagram, we're now going to talk about the layers of the skin and talk about the meaning of keratinized stratified squamous epithelium. Okay, so up here, remember, here's your little diagram that's showing you exactly where we are. So the epidermis is keratinized stratified squamous epithelium. Since it's stratified, it means that it occurs in layers that are called strata. We have two kinds of skin in the body, thin and thick. Thin skin has 4 different layers or strata, while thick skin has 5. And basically what happens is that cells that are in the deepest layer or in the lowest strata, these cells are alive, and as these cells divide, one of the daughter cells remains in the layer as a stem cell, and the other one is going to migrate up, 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 up towards the surface of the skin. And as it does so, it dies. So the skin that you see on the surface of your arm, for instance, is comprised of dead cells. This layer that is mitotic, as you can see, we've got some mitosis happening here in the bottom layer. This layer is called the stratum basale. It's the deepest layer of the epidermis. It consists of cuboidal or columnar epithelium. If you could try to remember that from our prerequisite module that you had to do before we actually started the class. Again, these are stem cells. They undergo mitosis, and they are producing keratinocytes. At first, the keratinocytes are going to have organelles and large nuclei, just like any other cell in our body, but that is going to change. They are going to form keratin intermediate filaments that are going to form keratin, which is a protein, as well as attachments between cells. Remember that our skin is going to function as a barrier between the inner tissues of our body and our environment. And we need to have these tight, close associations between our keratinocytes in order to prevent microbes and other foreign materials from entering and invading our lower, more delicate tissues. It's the stratum basale that also has melanocytes. And the melanocyte is here. It's this octopus looking like cell. You can see that it has these like tendrils that extend out from the cell, main cell proper. And then we also have our tactile epithelial cells. And here's that sensory neuron stretching through the dermis that it is associated with. The next layer that is superficial to the stratum basale is the stratum spinosum. And it's called the stratum spinosum because the cells look spiny. So they're starting to become dehydrated and lose their cytoplasm. But the desmosomes that are connecting these cells to each other, these proteins, they're kind of pulling on each other, and it gives the cells these spiny appearances. And so if you look closely in the picture, right around here, these little lines, those are representative of the desmosomes that occur in between the epithelial cells. Some of these cells are undergoing mitosis, but that ability is starting to be lost in these cells as they dehydrate. They're going to add strength and flexibility to the skin, and they are going to contain our intraepidermal macrophages, which is what you see here, this large pink cell. And then you've also got the projections of our melanocytes, and that is the stratum spinosum. Above that, we have the stratum granulosum. Here, the cells are starting to undergo apoptosis and they lose their organelles. The keratin is easily seen as dark spots or granules, which you can see in our picture here, but the cell is no longer synthesizing keratin. The grainy appearance that they have is due to a protein called keratohyalin, and this is going to form crosslinks between the keratin proteins, and it's going to help to keep the cells very closely together, again, maintaining this close association in between the epithelial cells to create that impenetrable barrier that is characteristic of our skin. These cells contain lamellar granules, which are lipid rich. It's going to regulate water loss and retention, and they are also going to help to prevent infection. It's also believed that the keratohyalin is going to modulate the dehydration of these cells. And again, by this time, these cells are not undergoing mitosis, and they are dying as they move up the strata to the most superficial layer of our epidermis. All right, in thick skin, we have a layer called the stratum lucidum. The thick skin is found in the soles of the feet, the palms of the hand, including the fingertips. And these cells present as being very flat and clear, and they're dead. They have lots of keratin. They have very thick cell membranes, and they are going to add toughness to the skin. So the bottoms of your feet and like where your heels are, um, you can tell that that skin is a little bit tougher than maybe the skin that's found on the inside of your forearm. And the most superficial layer of our epidermis is called the stratum corneum. These are the cells that are flat, they're dead, they have no organelles, but they still have their plasma membrane. The layers are going to overlap each other, and there are still some strong connections in between these cells. Eventually, they are shed and replaced by the cells from the lower strata. So again, as these cells are moving up and migrating up towards the surface of the skin, the ones that are up here at the top are going to be shed and replaced. Um, if any of you have ever had to dust your room or dust furniture in your house, um, most dust is made up of dead skin cells. These cells are going to add an extra layer of protection to the soft tissues that lie underneath our skin. So the pattern that we see here, starting in the stratum basale, moving up to the stratum corneum, is one of keratinization as you move up through the stratum spinosum and the stratum granulosum. And then the cells undergo apoptosis, where they die, and then they move up to the stratum corneum, where they are dead, they don't have any organelles, they retain their cell membranes, and then they are shed within 4 to 6 weeks of being born in the stratum basale. So, how do our cells in the stratum basale get oxygen and nutrients? Well, blood vessels from the dermis, or the layer of skin that lies beneath it, is they're going to allow oxygen and nutrients to diffuse into the stratum basale. But as you get further and further from the stratum basale, the oxygen and nutrients don't diffuse through, and that's why the cells are dying. The stratum basale, however, is going to be the most active metabolically. These are the cells that undergo mitosis, and they need that oxygen and nutrients in order to perform that function. All right, thanks for listening. Our next lecture will be about the dermis. So I'll see you next time. Thanks for listening.